afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, hosted by the Centre for Teaching and Learning. My name is Claire DeMarco. I'm the Director in the Centre for Teaching and Learning, and I will be moderating today's webinar. And the webinar today is Working and Studying and Living, Establishing a Work-Life Balance. And our presenter today is going to be Dr. Linda Bloomberg. But before we jump into the content, I do want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, we will be recording the webinar and hosting it on our Commons website. So no need to frantically put notes unless you want to. I know sometimes that helps with retention, but we will be recording this if you would like to go back and refer to the content. Also, we absolutely encourage participation, questions, comments, and there's a couple of ways you can do that in the Zoom webinar environment. So at the bottom of the screen, and you may have to sort of hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen for the toolbar to pop up, you'll see a Q&A option and a chat option. And you can use either of those to make comments or answer questions. One thing I will say about the chat, it defaults to sharing whatever you're writing to all panelists, which means just me and Linda with it. If you want to make a comment to the entire group or a question to the entire group, you'll just change the drop down from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. Just something that you are aware of. But I think on that note, we have everything, and I will hand it over to Dr. Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Claire, and welcome and hello to everybody. I hope that everybody is staying well and safe. When I first developed this webinar, when Claire and Tran asked me to present on this topic, I think it was over a month ago, I was very happy to do so, but I'd never thought that I'd be presenting in a time that this is more needed than now. Because I do imagine that many people watching this and many people on the call, like so many of us, are working more and more from home. Many of us now have children at home. And on top of that, we're still trying to stay ahead and abreast with our studies. So now more than ever before, ways to organize ourselves, organize our lives, and create a sort of semblance of order among all of this chaos becomes even more critical and even more important. Just before I proceed, I just want to reiterate what Claire said in that I always believe that these webinars should be interactive. And so I greatly welcome your questions and comments at any point. And I will be stopping at many points along the way for questions and comments. So please feel free to write those in the chat box or send them into Claire and she'll let me know and we'll address them. Okay, so the focus of today's webinar is establishing a work-life balance. So sorry, I just had to pick a dog up off the floor. We know that as adult learners, as adult students, we often find it very difficult to remain motivated while we're still managing our very busy lives. And as I said, even more so in today's time with so many unknowns and so many changes in our work and life schedules and in our children's and extended families as well, we're having to really struggle to keep this all in balance. To compound matters, the online learning experience often comes with its own set of challenges, as we know, leaving students sometimes feeling somewhat isolated and alone. Although, as you do know, at NCU, this is somewhat different because we really do make a very concerted effort to engage our students with their faculty and with the university at large through the Commons and through teaching through engagement. And we really have a very strong focus on making and instilling in our learners the feeling that they're not alone. So I hope that all of the learners on this call will acknowledge that and be aware that we really do go the extra mile to make this an engaged experience for you so that you're not out there on your own and that you are supported in your studies and throughout your educational journeys. However, that said, I know that all of us at some times feel discouraged when we're pulled in multiple directions. We feel pressured to meet all of our personal and professional commitments. And we sometimes wonder how we're going to keep this all together. Sometimes people even think of giving up on their programs because this becomes so overwhelming. But there are ways to address a work-life balance, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this webinar so that no one feels the need to be on that level where they are so discouraged that they give up on their studies, even for a short period of time. Now, the objectives of today's webinar are firstly to develop a clear understanding of what is required to begin your studies in an organized way. I just want to move this little box a little upwards. Sorry, whoops. I also want to ensure that you're able to set for yourselves a healthy work-life balance after having viewed this webinar. Introduce the mindset that's required to create the optimal physical and mental workspace to conduct your studies in an effective manner, and receive guidelines and suggestions regarding establishing a realistic and doable timeline. And I'm going to be addressing all of these objectives throughout today's webinar. The outcomes of the webinar are that you learn more about the strategies to effectively manage your time and work-life commitments, and that you also learn more about ways to establish realistic and doable timelines, because that is one of the critical pieces in setting yourselves up for success. So, overall, everybody who's engaging in their studies has a goal at the end of this tunnel, and that is to graduate, to be successful, to conduct your studies in an effective manner, and to walk away with the degree that you set out to achieve. The reality, however, is that it's not just a simple line that we go through to get to that goal. There are some hurdles along the way. And the reality is that there is work to be done, there are hurdles to be overcome. And in fact, the work can be pretty intense at times, especially at the graduate level, which is understandable. On top of the reality of the studies, we also have a lot going on in our home and personal lives, like significant others, children, family, extended family, birthdays, social media, pets, etc. So much. And in today's day and age, even more so with the pandemic, we're having to worry about our personal safety and wellness, taking care of those close to us, making sure that we all stay healthy and safe. So there's a lot going on. Let's take a look at some of the key challenges, and then I'm going to stop at the end of this slide for some questions. Some of the key challenges that we know, the typical challenges in engaging in graduate study, is the time commitment involved, because the work is intense and requires a lot of our time. Second are the competing commitments, our work and family and social and safety issues. The self-discipline and focus. It's not always easy to just, make that happen. We often have to struggle to become self-disciplined and focused. There are so many distractions in today's world, and now even more so than ever before. The distractions are immense, and they're really on a very important level, as I said previously, and as we all know, taking care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis so that we stay well and safe and protected. There's also energy involved. Working doesn't just happen. It requires a lot of energy and a lot of thinking. And thinking requires energy too. To think in an effective and focused manner requires us to really put energy into doing that. Then there is also what is called the imposter syndrome. Many of us experience that. It's that feeling of self-doubt, like, am I really up to this? Can I really handle the stress and the expectations of graduate level study? Am I capable? We often have these self-doubts, no matter how qualified we are in our personal and professional lives. Then we have the fear that goes with the imposter system. And the fear is, what if I don't succeed? What if I'm a failure? What will that mean? What will my family think of me? What will my friends think of me? What will I think of me? Then there are the financial challenges. How am I going to pay for this all? How am I going to make sure that I have enough finances to ensure that I can complete my studies in the time frame that I set for myself? Then, of course, is the current pandemic fears and trepidations and anxiety around all of the key issues that we're dealing with right now. I'm going to stop now for a moment just to take any questions, comments, insights, shared experiences. Please feel free to share. All and any comments and thoughts are welcome.
Linda, someone had a question which we may be getting to, or it might be appropriate to address now, is the one thing you do to balance your family and professional life? Oh, we also have another question. Great question. Is dealing with the imposter syndrome normal? Now, everything going on, my self-doubt has been elevated. With the pandemic, it has been more intense. I lost my job and it is a lot.
Okay. Let me take each of those questions. The first is balancing work and family life. And that goes back to the slide that I presented where we have kids and animals and responsibilities, and obviously our family comes first. We have to take care of ourselves to be in a position to conduct our studies effectively. But the point of this webinar is to show you how to integrate your studies in an effective way so that you don't have to put your studies on the back burner all the time, and so that you can proceed and move along towards ultimately completing the program. So there's a lot, and again, it's a very personal thing. We all have different commitments at home. Some of us have large families, some of us have small families, some of us are living with parents, some of us are living with our children, some of us are living with extended families. Some of us who may not even be living with extended families still have our extended families as a responsibility, our parents and grandparents, or aunts and uncles, or cousins. Some of us are single and are living on our own, but that doesn't mean that we don't have responsibilities elsewhere, like job responsibilities or even family who are not living with us. So on all levels and in every situation, there are uniquenesses to consider, and you have to consider your own personal circumstances and decide how you're going to make this work. And hopefully some of what we talk about in this webinar are going to be those key issues of making this work for you. The question about the imposter syndrome, there's been a lot of research done on it, and yes, it is very common. And as I said earlier, it's not just people who may not have already achieved academically, it's even with people who've achieved highly academically. There's often that sense of self-doubt, like, how will I do this? Am I cut out for this? Will I manage? Will I succeed? What if I don't succeed? What will this mean? What will this say about me and my capabilities? And as the person who posed the question said, and I really feel for so many people in that position in the world right now, where jobs have been lost, and people that we know, or even people in our community that we don't know, but we see on the news and we see in social media all the time, have become ill or even died. All of that plays into our feelings of self-doubt and our anxieties and fears. And that's really normal. What we're experiencing now really is unprecedented. But any intense or fearful situation will increase that feeling of self-doubt because our own feelings of anxiety are heightened. I hope that answers that.
And we do have some additional questions related to the imposter syndrome, Linda. So I'm kind of going to move around.
Yes.
Don't worry if you've already asked a question, folks. I will get to it. Dolores asked if caring for an elderly parent with dementia, if that could impact imposter syndrome, and then how long does it last?
Okay, I think as I said, I think any stressful situation can exacerbate the imposter syndrome. If we're not feeling in a good place ourselves, or we feel stressed out or worried or anxious because we have to take care of an elderly parent or a sick family member or an animal who's not doing well, any of those situations, or if we've lost our jobs, highly, highly stressful. If we're moving home, very, very stressful. All of these circumstances will play into an imposter syndrome. Remember, not always, but highly likely, because we're feeling more fragile. And so we start questioning our abilities. And our abilities to do with our studies is something that we're concerned about. And so we start questioning those abilities and skills. Regarding how long an imposter syndrome lasts, I don't think I have the answer for that. Sometimes it's just even a fleeting moment. Sometimes it's just even a thought in our head and then it goes away. Sometimes it can keep on plaguing us and reoccurring. So it's just different. It's just different. And I think that trying to understand that this is not always a rational feeling and not always something that is justified. If you can understand that it occurs with a lot of people and it's very common in academic studies, that may help you to a certain extent to put those feelings aside and say to yourself, I'm doubting myself, but I know that I can do this. I really know that in the end, I can do this with the support that's available to me through my academic advisor, my instructor, and the university community at large. I am going to do this. If others have managed, I know that I can do this too. And of course, one more thing is that stopping for a moment, taking a walk outside, meditating, doing exercise, engaging in positive experiences are also likely to take away those feelings of self-doubt. Anything else, Claire?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions in here, but I'm not sure if you're maybe going to address them later. A few questions.
Well, if I'm gonna address them, I'll just say so.
Okay,
and then
awesome.
I'll take them later.
Yeah, a couple of questions about that challenge with motivation. You're tired, you're exhausted. How do you kind of rejuvenate yourself? That's a question, if you want to take that or address that later.
Yeah, again, that one relates to what I've just said, and that we're all, it's not uncommon to feel tired and exhausted and worn out and stressed when you're having to produce assignments weekly and take care of things back home and in the workplace. And again, I just know from personal experience and talking to many people, my colleagues here at NCU, often just sometimes taking that time to step away, even if it's a day or more. Step away, do something that interests you, focus on something positive, whether it's your hobbies or your exercise, and just to take your mind off the work, because sometimes it just gets too much. And that happens even with kids at school. The same goes for kids in high school. It's just, let's just put it aside for a moment. And one of the benefits of stepping away, really, I find with a lot of my work, and I do a lot of publishing and writing, and working with students and their work, very often just putting it aside for a while and going for a walk outside lets you get your thoughts in order, gives you time to think and reflect, and I find that very, very valuable.
Okay, we have a question specific about the pandemic now, which actually, Linda, I may be able to take some of this. Is there assistance or help during dealing with the pandemic? I signed up without knowing this would happen. What will happen if I've not completed the program prior to my expected ending time? I want to finish on time, but with the pandemic, things have changed.
Okay.
As I wanted to mention about that one is there is a website of resources. And I will grab the link and I'll put that in the chat for everyone so you can have it. And I would definitely recommend talking to your academic advisor about your degree program. If you don't think if you need to take a break or anything, they can absolutely work with you on that. There's some restrictions, limitations around policy and financial aid or whatever. It's not just, you can't just take a break whenever you want to type of thing. But they will absolutely work with you, and you would not be the first and nor the last person to finish, not necessarily on that initial goal date. And I think it's a good dissertation is a finished dissertation. Get there eventually, and that's all that matters. But Linda, anything else on that note?
No, I think just from what you've said, Claire, NCU is very, very supportive always, and especially at this time. I've noticed an incredible amount of resources from leadership coming down to encourage us to support our students to the best of our ability. NCU is very, very well aware of what our students are experiencing. All of our students have been impacted, some more than others. We have many, many students in the nursing educator profession, and these people are literally on the front line. And so sometimes a leave of absence is necessary. As Claire said, there are policies around these absences, but your academic advisor is standing by to take any and all questions and to try and assist you to best craft the plan ahead. Remember, sometimes life happens, as we can see right now, completely beyond our control. And the best laid plans of mice and men don't always work out exactly. This time that we're living in right now today is exactly that. We cannot be completely sure. And many students have had to change their studies based on current challenges. So whereas they were going to be doing, for instance, data gathering through personal face-to-face interviews, we've now crafted new ways of collecting data through synchronous tools such as Zoom or Skype, and this is all possible. So there are a lot of possibilities. This really does not mean that this is the end of the line. We are putting a lot of support resources in place. So please reach out to your academic advisor and through the Commons, where there are a lot of discussions and resources posted on these topics.
And Linda, we have interesting comment. I have found that during this time, I am more focused and doing a better job with balancing life. I feel a sense of guilt for feeling this way in the midst of what we are going through globally.
I think that's an incredible comment. And I think that a lot of us can possibly relate to this. We're all very, very fortunate in that we're working and studying online. So the faculty at NCU are doing their daily jobs, and our students are too, even though you are impacted by the pandemic in financial ways, which is huge, and there's no undermining that or understressing that in any manner of means. But you're still doing your studies online. You don't have to travel to a brick and mortar institution. On top of that, because some people have got a leave of absence or are not working in their regular jobs right now, many students are taking this initiative to focus on their studies because they have the extra time. Please don't feel guilty about that. Feel empowered. Feel that this is an opportunity and a gift to really give even more to your studies at this time. We're really fortunate if we're in that position. As I said, some of our students are actually working on the front lines in the nursing and medical and health professions. But if you do have the time to work more on your studies, that's great, and you should just accept that as a gift. Certainly don't feel guilty.
Yeah. A couple of requests for suggestion on time management. We have one student who's working 11-hour days, 6 days a week, and is at the data collection point in her PhD. And then we have someone else who now has 2 kids, 5 and under at home, and definitely challenges there with time time with these new responsibilities.
Yeah. That's really a tough situation, because with kids at home, especially young kids, even teenagers, whereas you were used to them going off to their schools every day, they're now sitting with you day in and day out, and you have to take care of them, cook for them, entertain, etc., etc. So these are the challenges of the time we're living in, and there's no getting away from that. But I think that having some time management skills, even more so now, can help you in just moving ahead one step at a time. Remember, you don't have to do this all at once. And one of the things I'm going to get to further on in this webinar, and I had this in the presentation even before the pandemic hit us, is forgive yourself. And we're going to be getting to that in a moment. We're very quick as humans to knock ourselves on the head, give ourselves a little slap. But we need to be a little more tolerant and take care of ourselves, especially at this time.
All right. I think we can continue, Linda. If I've missed anything, I will make sure to address it.
Perfect. And I just want to say before I continue, I so appreciate all of those comments. I'm sure Claire does too. We so appreciate people sharing their personal experiences and having taking the time, firstly, to watch these webinars and also to reach out with questions and concerns and thoughts and reflections, because we all learn from each other in this way. So just jumping off what I was saying about the imposter syndrome and other feelings of self-doubt and stress, we're asking all these voices, we're hearing all these voices in our heads, like where am I going to do this, and what am I going to do, and who's going to help me, and when's this going to take place, and when am I going to finish, and why am I feeling this way, and how am I going to get this done? It's kind of like all time consuming. So we have all of these voices in our heads, and again, I think all of us experience this at some time, no matter how qualified we are. Even those of us who work at the university and are not actually doing studies, but working with other faculty and with students, we also feel overwhelmed at times. Everybody does to some extent at some point. And then we have to look at the path to success. As one of the questions earlier said, I may not be able to finish in the timeline or the time frame that I'd set for myself. There are so many different ways to get to that end point. And I think what this pandemic and this current situation has shown us is that we really have not that much control over how and when we're going to get to the end point. So please just keep working. Just keep the goal in mind. Keep those visions in your mind of a successful completion, even as we're going through all these twists and turns that we did not really expect at this time. Sometimes, I just want to get back to that, sometimes the visuals, like these visuals, are really good to sort of keep us motivated and keep that vision in our minds of what we're thinking and what we're dealing with. So let's get on to organization and time management now in more detail. And I'm going to be discussing each of these pieces that I have here in the bullet, starting with mindset. And a lot about mindset I've already actually said in answering some of your questions and concerns right now. And that is getting that mindset of I can do this, developing an I can do this attitude. And it doesn't have to be done today or tomorrow or next week, but just I can do this. I can get it done. I will get it done and I will be successful. So once we have that positive mindset, and it also goes back to that imposter syndrome, try and overcome those feelings of fear in a way that you can in terms of being rational with yourself and saying to yourself, I'm not the first person to do this. I can manage my studies. I do have a support system here at NCU. My academic advisor, my instructor, and my colleagues and peers are here to support me. So I can get this done and I will get this done. Then moving on from mindset, I talk about, and I write about this in my book as well, Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation. I actually have a whole chapter on, it's called Gearing Up, taking charge of yourself and your work. And that's really what the focus of this webinar is. And so the next bullet that I write about is creating your mental and physical space. And I want to look at that for a moment in a little bit more detail. There are two things here at work. The first is setting aside a physical workplace that's dedicated to your work and your studies. Find this place where this is the only thing that you do. It could be in one room in your home. It could be in your office. It could be in a public space. Well, we're not permitted to be in those public spaces now, but sometimes people find it very conducive to going out to a coffee shop or a library or a cafe to do their work. Because there they feel less distracted and they can really focus completely on their work. So the first is finding that physical space that works for you. And if it's in your home, it's more challenging now if you have children and family around. But try and find somewhere that you can actually close off and dedicate some time to just doing your studies and focusing on your studies. Then aside from that physical space is the mental space. Your mental workspace goes back to that mindset. The attitude of I can do this. That's your mental workspace. So the physical and mental workspace are both really important concepts in trying to be successful. Next, which is the third bullet, is creating a system for organizing and managing your work. Now remember, when you're working at the graduate level, the volume of work becomes pretty immense. If you're involved in doing dissertation work or even content courses, there are readings to cover, there are documents, there are resources, there are articles, there are YouTube videos. There are so many different things that you're required to take care of within the coursework. And so you should start collecting and storing all the materials that are potentially important for your topic or that are required in your course. So for example, in many courses, not in the dissertation courses, but in many of our content courses, you'll have a syllabus with required readings and required resources to try and get your head around all of those by storing them in the appropriate places on your computer, in files, whatever works best for you. And try also to keep records of all the relevant information that you're using, because record keeping is extremely important in maintaining an ongoing, working, successful trail, so to say. So to keep records of all your documents, people use many different ways for keeping those records, like a manual method. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be a Word document. It could be some of the tools that are available like RefWorks or OneDrive or Google Drive or Google Notes or OneNote, etc. So all of those are really very, very helpful to you to try and store all of your information efficiently. Also make sure that your information is stored securely. Make sure that you are saving to a hard drive if necessary. Make sure that your computer is being backed up. All of those things means that you're taking care of the ultimate fear, and that is that our computer breaks down or shuts down for whatever reason, and we're not able to retrieve some information. We never want that to happen. So choose the storage method that works best for you, and make sure that all your material is stored systematically so that it is easily retrievable when you need it. And by that I mean, when you're saving documents, for instance, try and save them in a manner that is consistent For example, the way we recommend at the university is by your last name, then your initial of your first name, the name of the document, and then the date. And that will enable you to access it quickly when you're trying to retrieve it for a particular purpose. So that's what I mean by creating a system of organizing and managing your work. Next, and what I talk about in my book as well, is tracking your thinking. And this may not be familiar to everybody, but tracking our thinking also helps to keep us on track and to allow us to go back and reflect on previous experiences, which often becomes very important, especially when we're handling a very large project like a dissertation. So to keep track of your thinking, you can do this by different ways, such as journaling, writing memos, or even keeping a research diary. Keeping a running log of all conversations you have with colleagues and advisors also is important, because this will also allow you to think more clearly about these conversations, think more clearly about what has been recommended to you, and then also go back in time when necessary to see what was recommended and why at that particular point in time. Remember, the focus is on moving forward and progressing effectively. So everything that's going to help us move forward each step of the way becomes very, very important. And tracking your thinking is one of those things. Also, be sure to track your productivity. Remember, you should be proud of what you're achieving and proud of all the accomplishments. Bless you, Claire. Proud of all the accomplishments that you're making along the way. So record what you do each day. Make lists of what you need to do. Keep running records of what you're trying to achieve. It's really very gratifying to be able to check those off as you accomplish them and see how you're progressing day by day or week by week or even month by month, whatever works best for you. And pay attention to what you're tracking, because this can reveal important patterns about how you're being most productive and where you're falling short. So you may be able to see that you're doing best if you set aside 3 hours a day and go out to a public place to do your work than if you stay at home for 5 hours a day and try and manage all the distractions around you. So see what works best for you. And you'll notice that when you track your productivity. Second to last is developing a collegial support system. And this is really, really important. And at NCU, even though we have one-to-one learning, which means that we're learning with our instructors and not in a class of people, as in a traditional university, one-to-one learning does not mean alone learning. And we like to drive that thought home very, very clearly. You are not alone in the process. You have a very, very strong connection and support network around you here at NCU, being your academic advisor, your instructors, the financial support team, the Commons team, the library team, Academic Success Center team, the Center for Teaching and Learning team. There are so many resources here. All you have to do is ask and reach out, and you'll be provided with what you need to support you along the way. So please realize that this support system is very available and should be seen as very supportive as you navigate the very long and tedious research and dissertation and even content course process. And finally, as I said earlier, is that notion of forgiving yourself. Remember, none of us is perfect, and none of us, however smart or however organized, can do this in a day. All of our graduate studies take time and effort. And even though we may sometimes feel that we're not achieving to the best of our abilities, or we may not feel that we're reaching our potential, or we feel distracted and upset and frustrated because the process is so long and it's not going the way we expected, please forgive yourself. Understand and accept the necessary and slow movement and messiness of this process. And again, I write about this a lot because it is a messy process. Doing a dissertation, for instance, is not just, well, I'll enroll in 9901A and I'll complete this and this and this, and I'll get it done in this and this and this time, and then I'll be done. It just doesn't happen like that, because it is a messy and iterative process. And so forgive yourself as you move through the process and make the time and develop the mindset so that you are setting yourself up for the best possible success to finally complete it. Again, I'm going to stop for a moment, Claire, if there are any questions here.
Yes. What is the best way to set up a study schedule if your work or time at home schedule vary frequently?
I'm going to get to that a little bit when I talk about timelines and a schedule planning tool that I'm going to share with you. But remember, we're also at a time and a point now, which is probably not going to last forever, hopefully. And we are going to get back to our regular work-life patterns, hopefully sooner rather than later. But it may take a little while, as we know. So try and, again, forgive yourself and give yourself a little bit extra slack in these very difficult times when things are heightened and things are sometimes a little out of control and chaotic. So whereas a lot of us may have children at home right now, which we don't normally have, this is one of these times that we really have to just step back and kind of let the process run its course and forgive ourselves for not being able to stay on track as we normally have. So many students have made excellent progress. And so just remember that you've made that progress. You've already come to a point where you've done so much work. Now may be the time that you have to cut yourself a little bit of slack and take it a little slower, or just realize that it's not going to go as smoothly as it's gone, and that you're going to get back to that point, hopefully sometime soon.
And then someone had a comment to share with the group. I find it helpful to create small attainable goals for specific areas in my life, personal and professional, and then celebrate them when the goals are accomplished.
That is a wonderful piece of advice. And I call it eating the elephant one bite at a time. And that really is what this person has said. It really is about chunking your time. And you'll see, I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a few moments when I talk about the schedule planning tool and setting realistic timelines, because that's really what it's all about. We have to take the study process one step at a time. And so setting yourself manageable goals, which are relatively easy to accomplish, will be way more successful than if you set yourself a very difficult goal and expect to accomplish it all in one go. So breaking up the tasks into smaller, manageable tasks is very effective, whether this applies to one single assignment or an entire course. So please do take that advice from your colleague. It's very important and very helpful. Thank you.
And then someone had a question, should we make changes in the way we spend our weekends?
I think that I'd like some other people's input on that. I think that's a very personal preference, because remember, if we have family, sometimes it's very difficult to set ourselves a weekend schedule when we have family at home and who are expecting us, especially young children, who have expectations of being with parents and family members. So again, that's a very personal choice. And whatever you feel works best for you and your families and your community is what you should try to achieve. For some people, working over the weekends works excellently. For some people, they prefer to put their weekends aside. Although I do realize that with the structure of our courses being weekly feedback on assignments, we are compelled very often to work over the weekends to make those deadlines. So please work as best as you can, especially at this time, to make things work for you. Does anyone else have any input on that question? If you don't now, you can also write into the Center for Teaching and Learning, and Claire will send some emails on to me if my input is required, because that's a really important topic. The person who raised that may even consider posting that question in the comments and getting some feedback from your colleagues there, because I think it's an area that a lot of people will relate to. That will be a wonderful comments post. I'd love to see that.
Mm-hmm. Now with being shifted working from home, I am having a hard time balancing work and studies. Any advice?
Yeah. It's very, very, very hard. No one can deny that. You may be home, but your work, for many people, well, some people are off work for the time being, and some people are working from home. Now, working from home doesn't necessarily mean less work. We know that. So now you're working from home and studying from home, and you may even have children at home on top of it all. So no one can deny that's very tough. And again, it just will require a little bit of forgiveness on your part, a little bit of a slower pace with your studies. You know that you have to fulfill your work responsibilities. You have, you have employers and workplaces that still have expectations that you perform. So NCU is here to help our students navigate those stresses and those demands. And we will try and work with all of our students to the best of our abilities to make this work in the most manageable way for you.
Linda, a few people responded about taking breaks on weekends, and it seems to be just a general consensus that you need to take a break, whether it be a weekend, a Tuesday, but that also weekends can be a good time to catch up on work. So,
okay.
Again,
I'd love to see those comments posted in the comments, because there we can continue the discussion, and the larger NCU community, not just the School of Education who are on this webinar, can also chime in and post their experiences, because remember, at a time like this, which is unprecedented, we can all learn from each other, and we are all learning as we go day by day. So I'd love to see that conversation grow.
And then we have a question: what is the recommended amount of time to work on your assignments daily?
Again, that's really a matter of personal preference and personal time available. Some people have more time available than others. You really just have to work out what works for you given your other commitments, and then try and stay within those parameters. So remember, if you're very, very busy with work and or family, trying to tell yourself that you're going to work 10 hours a day on your studies is not going to work. It's just going to fall flat. It's going to like set yourself up for failure. So try and be realistic. And I'm going to get to that right now when I go on to this self-schedule planning tool, because that'll allow you to try and work out what is the best possible and manageable time frame for you at this particular point in time. So I think I'm going to move for a clear.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, I think we can address these in the next gap. There's just a couple comments.
Okay, perfect. Well, if there's anything right now, let me know.
Maybe just this one question: how much time is too much time for breaking?
Now you're really putting me on the spot. I'm not the expert on that. I think, again, it's a matter of personal preference. See what works for you. If you feel that you're giving yourself too many breaks and it's very distracting because you're going for extremely long walks, and then you get back and you feel tired, and then you make yourself something to eat, and then you have to lie down and you have to watch a bit of TV, well, then the day is gone. And so that kind of break is not really working for you. If you're giving yourself a very short break and you come back feeling exhausted and not really rested, and you feel that you want to go out again, or that's also not working for you. So again, it's really a matter of personal preference as to what works for you. These are all very personal preferences. Try and sort of do these experiments with yourself and see what's working best. And by tracking your thinking and your journaling, as I spoke about earlier, is one way to write down what works and what doesn't work. So you can come back to it at a later stage or even the next day and say, hey, as I'm in the shower and I've been thinking about this kind of break really works for me. It really works for me to go out for 15 minutes, come back and have something to eat, and then within the hour, I'm back at my studies. So those are the kind of examples that you can kind of like run by yourself in your own mind, or even talk about them to people that you're living and working with. Ask for their opinions and their perspectives and shared experiences. It very much, I just want to say the final thing on this particular slide is that sharing your experiences and looking for the input of others is very important in this process. You don't want to isolate yourself in your studies. So we're isolated now in our homes and lives, but that doesn't mean and should never mean that you're isolated in your studies. Again, online learning does not mean alone learning. I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to talk about creating a schedule planning tool and establishing a realistic timeline. Now, the schedule planning tool is something that I have in my book, and you're also free to use it off this webinar, off this PowerPoint slide when this is sent out to you by Claire after this presentation. And this is just one example, and you can create your own one for yourself, but I call it a schedule planning tool, and it has different aspects. It has a time to write out your schedule at the top, which is where you decide how much time a week or a day you're willing to set aside and devote to your studies. And as I said previously, be realistic. What's going to work for you? And you can actually write down, I commit to setting aside X number of hours for writing each week. Also, make a list of your regular activities during the week and determine which days and even hours you can realistically set aside each week. And list these in chronological order. And when I'm saying this, I actually mean physically do this. Actually go and write down these different things, because it'll help you put everything in order and in perspective. Then the next arrow down, where I call set up, is where you determine what you'll need to set yourself up so that your space, your physical space and your mental space is conducive to writing with minimal distractions. And try and brainstorm all possibilities. What do you need to set yourself up physically for success? What do you need? You need your computer. You may need extra gadgets that help you study, a printer, for instance, a scanner, things like that. A telephone, your cell phone, your iPad, different things that you may need to set yourself up. And the third arrow down I call time. And this is where you determine the length of your writing, the length of your study sessions. And again, be realistic. How much time do you need to block off each day or each second day to be successful? Look at your schedule above, which is the first arrow. Write this down. My goal is X amount of hours minimum per week. And determine why the days that you've set for yourself will work. And this goes back to that weekend question. If you feel that you work best on the weekends, then set yourself some time on the weekends. If you feel that it's during the week, set yourself some time during the week. Set yourself particular times of the day or evening that work best for you. Maybe it's before your kids wake up. Maybe it's after your kids have gone to bed. If you don't have kids, maybe it's a time of the day that you've always felt most comfortable to work, like in the afternoons or in the mornings, or in between different other commitments that you have. Then we have what I call sessions. Identify why the times that you've set will enable you to be most productive, and write this down explicitly. I feel that I can work best on Tuesday evenings because this is when my children have gone off to bed early, and I'm able to set aside a particular 5-hour block on a Tuesday late afternoon evening. So try and understand which of those times works for you, and try and figure out in your mind why that time works for you and maybe why certain times don't work for you. In other words, try and avoid the times that are not working well for you. And finally, what I call frequency is where you explain the amount of time you need to best sustain your momentum. In other words, what I'm trying to say here, and it's very important with studies, especially graduate studies, you want to keep a momentum. You want to keep going. When you stop and there's a break in your thinking or a break in your productivity, that's when it's sometimes very difficult to get back to it. So remember, even a little bit of work every day or every second day is going to set you up for success, rather than leaving it for 3 or 4 days and then trying to come back to it. I'm sure all of you have experienced that feeling of like losing your train of thought. And that really happens when we are unfocused for a period of time. And especially when you're doing something as intense as a dissertation, you really need to keep going, even for little bits of time, one step at a time, just to keep your mind on it every single day or every second day at least. So these are some of the things you can do to set yourself up to create a schedule planning tool that works for you. And again, this is something that you may want to discuss in the comments. Like, how can I create, I could maybe post this document with the help of Claire, and then people can comment on how they're setting up their schedule planning tools and what works best. And we can all learn again from the tips and tricks of our peers and colleagues. So the first thing that I want to discuss, just going back to the previous slide, is creating a schedule planning tool. The second thing is establishing a realistic timeline. So why have I got these ducks here? Because we need to keep all of our ducks in a row. And to do that, we need to establish some sort of realistic timeline that is going to work for us. Remember, sometimes a timeline is required in our courses, and we formally have to submit a timeline or a potential timeline. And the point of this is that it becomes an effective way to manage your time and keep yourself on track. A useful guiding principle that I've always found is to always have a sense of what your next step is going to be. So in other words, if you feel that you can accomplish A, B, or C, think about what you're going to do when that's accomplished. And that's how you develop your timeline, by setting yourself one goal at a time, and with each goal naturally leading on to the next and successive goals. Remember, identifying the various stages in the process and pacing yourself and documenting your achievements of your goals and sub-goals is one way that you'll contribute to keeping yourself task-oriented and focused. And it's especially useful, as I just said, that you don't lose momentum and that you keep moving forward each and every day. So keep your timeline realistic. It's not going to serve you well to set yourself a timeline that won't be doable and that's just going to frustrate you. So if you think that you can accomplish X, Y, and Z in a very short space of time, and you get to that point and you haven't accomplished these goals, you're going to feel disappointed and frustrated and naturally feeling like a failure. And that's not what is going to help you be successful. So as you're creating your timeline, be very, very cognizant of being aware of all the other commitments that you have going on in your life and try and set that timeline accordingly. I know that every single person can do that. Again, getting back to that, forgiving yourself. If you set even a realistic timeline and you get to a point that you haven't achieved what you wanted to achieve, even if it's a realistic goal, just be aware that that happens, that life gets in the way, that it's okay. It's not going to make you be unsuccessful. It's not a reflection of your capabilities and abilities. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you have to feel frustrated with yourself. Just adjust your timeline and keep moving forward, because it's that continual one step at a time that's going to get you to the final goal. Okay, Claire, I'm going to stop there for a moment.
Thank you, Linda. We have a couple of comments which I think align nicely with this about some suggestions, some strategies that work for other students. Madeline recommends taking a look at assignments early in the week. Don't necessarily have to spend hours on them, but just take a look at it so she uses that so she can sort of plan ahead. I think that's a really great idea. Ebony, she splits up her time 1 to 3 hours a day, depending on the day, and then taking those 10 to 15-minute mental breaks. Portia recommends using positive words of affirmation, kind of to help with that motivation side of things, which I also think is a great idea as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. It's all about choosing what works for you and choosing what's going to give you that sense of calm and reassurance. Again, especially at this time when the stresses are immense. So if it's going out to walk outside, walk around the block, just walk up and down your hallway, if you live in a building, going out to get some fresh air, walking your dog, calling a friend on the phone, doing some exercise, doing some meditation, doing an online yoga class, any of these things that work for you is going to be what helps you move forward. So again, a wonderful discussion point that whoever wants to post that on, in the comments, what works for you, what have you found are successful strategies. I'm sure all of the students at NCU would love to know more about this and also share their own experiences, because there's power in sharing. And we are all here in a community that's a very shared and sharing and giving community. So please take advantage of that. And a lot of this will happen in the Commons, as well as on other levels with people that you may be working with in Academic Success Center, or the librarians, or the Center for Teaching and Learning, or just with your instructor or your advising team. So there are lots and lots of different avenues to share and receive support.
This is an interesting question, Linda. I definitely have a perspective on it, but I'd like to hear yours too. Don't you think repeating statements like most students may need supplemental courses to complete the chapter, which requires more time and money, could be discouraging? I have seen these statements repeatedly in the syllabus, weekly Dropbox instructions, and so forth. Don't you think these should be minimized? So for those of you who don't know, this is specifically referencing once you're in the dissertation phase, where the opportunities to take supplemental courses if you need them to complete your dissertation. So Linda, do you have any thought on that?
We'd love to hear more about that, especially the curriculum development and ID teams are always willing to make any necessary revisions in wording in courses and in the resources that we provide. So Claire, can you speak more to that from the Center of Teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think maybe it would help to understand why that is mentioned so often. And it's because the dissertation process, it's so variable how long it will take. So for some students, they get through it super fast, and there's a lot of variables that impact that, not necessarily to do with ability or motivation, and vice versa. It can take a little longer to complete the different deliverables of the dissertation. We want to make sure students feel completely comfortable if they have to take a supplemental course and not feel that they're an exception or they did something wrong. And we don't want it to come as a surprise as well. So that's another reason for being very clear. Hey, you may need to take the supplemental course. That's okay. It's not a bad thing. But I can see how as a student I think, more time, more money. I get, I think it's a balance we have to meet. We want students to not realize or think something abnormal versus, maybe repeating it too much. But definitely an interesting comment there. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So I'm going to move forward just in the interest of time. My big message is develop this I can do this attitude. And this is actually a card that I once found in a grocery store, and I took a picture of it. I actually bought a number of them and I've sent them out to people at various times, and I really love it. It's based on a Japanese proverb, and it says, the day you decide to do it is your lucky day. And remember, each and every day is a lucky day as you move forward with your studies and with life in general. So develop that I can do this attitude, because you can. Each and every one of you have gotten to this point in your program because you can do it. And there's no need to compare yourself to anybody else or anybody else's progress. This is a very personal process. And so take pride in your accomplishments and move forward. So we really only have like 2 more minutes left for questions and answers. But again, any questions that come in after this webinar, Claire will collect them and we can respond to you, and we can do it, on a one-to-one basis through emails or through the comments. So any last questions?
Yeah, someone has a question about when assignments are due, and I can take that one, Linda, that they are due midnight, Sundays, Arizona time. So this specific student's in New Jersey. So right now, midnight Arizona time.
3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but bear in mind that varies because good old Arizona, we don't follow daylight saving time. So once you go back to daylight saving, it'll actually be 2 a.m. So I always recommend play it safe. Try not to go down to the wire. That way you sort of don't have to worry so much about the time difference. But if you're maybe an international student, or obviously if you're West Coast or Hawaii, you'll have to, your week starts a little earlier. Obviously your submission will come before midnight, depending on.
And also something that I always tell my students, Claire, and I work with a lot of students as well as with faculty, is that if something happens and you do need extra time, just email your instructor ahead of time and let them know, because most instructors are aware that life happens. And if you need an extra day, sometimes even extra 2 days, just let your instructor know, and most likely they're going to be okay with it and not penalize you in any way. And so there shouldn't be any pressure when you really do need that extra time. Just ask. Remember, again, it's all about, we are here to provide support and assistance. We want our students to succeed.
That's great advice, Linda.
So that's really everything that I wanted to discuss. We're actually right on the dot, and I don't want to overstep the mark, or I know everybody has different things they have to do right now. So Claire, thank you so much for offering me this opportunity. I really enjoyed doing this webinar. I feel that it was more relevant now than ever before. And thank you so much to everybody who took the time to attend.
Thank you, Linda. We appreciate you. Lots of thank yous in the chat and the Q&A. So we will have this posted in the comments. Give me about 24 hours to get everything set up, and you guys can review the webinar and the PowerPoint. But everyone have a great day, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Claire.